Hi everyone, I'm Alessandro. I'm based at UCL. Very excited about this session. And the first person we have speaking is Graham Lee from Oxford.
Right. Thank you, Alessandro. Good to see so many people. This is the title that I originally submitted my thesis under. This is the title I then submitted this talk under. And then I have my viva, and my examiners suggested that I update the title of my thesis. So I also have a slide where I update the title of this talk as well. I really don't like Gaussian processes. I want to write Python libraries. This is something that someone I interviewed as part of my thesis said to me, and I thought it was a really nice quote, and it shows one of the interesting aspects of the problem that we have with research software engineering, is that we have a load of people who want to do this work, who can see what the problems are and have opinions on how to solve them and have the skills to solve them, and are embedded in a system that doesn't let them solve these problems. So that's kind of an interesting problem to investigate. I, back in 2019, was hired into the Oxford RSE group out of experience, like 20 years at the time, of being a software engineer in like the commercial sector. And they hired me and they said, we want to take your commercial software engineering skills, we want to take your knowledge about building industry software and to do the same in our academic context. And I kind of asked the question, well, why? How is that going to help? Is that going to help? Is that actually what you want? Do you value the same things in your software that a commercial organization values in their software? Do you do your work according to the same principles that an industry software engineer holds? And do you need the same practices? And my line manager, who then became my doctoral supervisor, said, you know what, that's a great question. Why don't you spend 5 years writing a 350-page LaTeX document that literally only 3 people will ever read? And that's because it's part of their job to read it. So he actually made it sound a bit more compelling than that, but that's what I did. And we know the challenges in research software. We know that over like the last 10 years or so, the funding councils have been asking questions like, do you have the skills you need to do computational research or digital research, depending on which funding council you ask, effectively? And that the answer has been, like, to a large extent, no. A lot of researchers don't feel comfortable that they know how to write software, or that they know how to necessarily even use the research software they need. So question one was, is that still true? Do UK-based researchers, and focusing on the UK was basically a way of kind of scoping, creating a boundary around this research to make it like tractable within a PhD program. Do they have the skills and training they need? Now, this is something that perhaps should have changed over the last 10 years, because we've had the RSE movement for the last 10 years. We've had people who are specializing in research software and are going out into the research community and evangelizing it. And then I asked, like, is research software engineering a distinct profession? Is there something going on here that isn't academia as standard? It isn't research as like kind of historically practiced. Is it actually a new profession, a new career? Does it have like an autonomous way of doing things? Are RSEs doing something that is different, and that they are free to use their special technical knowledge to do things in a different way? Do people see RSE as a distinct thing that like has value? Are RSEs trying to sort of help other people or like society at large? And do they have, is there a kind of identifiable body of knowledge that people who are research software engineers need to know, or like do know and use in their work. Finally, how does an RSE actually, sorry, not finally, it's question 3. How do RSEs actually think about that work? What do they think about? What are the competing influences on a research software engineer's work, and how do they navigate those competing influences? How do we choose what to do based on the various forces, pressures, and available paths that we could take? And now finally, how does the way in which we kind of formally structure our relationship with the rest of the academic community influence the way that we work? Now, I'll spoiler for the last question, because I got to this question last in what was already a very long PhD program, I didn't collect enough data to answer that question. It's still an interesting question to explore. I won't have an answer for you in the next 25 minutes. So what did I do? Well, the short answer, the one that my examiners know what these words mean, is it was a constructivist mixed methods approach. I will explain what that means for an audience of people who aren't my examiners and weren't made to read 350 pages before we came into this room. So constructivist means that I didn't kind of build a model of research software engineering and goes, here's what I think it is. I'm now going to gather data to test whether that is what's really happening, whether that model is valid. I gathered data and used the conversations that I had with other RSEs, with the other people who interact with RSEs, so journal publishers, researchers, people on funding councils, vendors of software that RSEs are using, various people. And I constructed by kind of categorizing what they were saying and then looking at how the categories fits together. I constructed my model of what RSE is from my interactions with the people that I worked with in my study. Mixed methods approach means having both quantitative and qualitative research. In this case, a kind of framing survey, which was there to kind of identify whether this skills gap that I talked about still exists. And we get answers numerically from that survey, followed by interviews with RSEs and with other people who work with research software or are stakeholders in the research software ecosystem, finding and reading and analyzing blog posts that people write about RSE. Now, this is actually a fairly underused form of data, but blogs are really interesting because a blog is someone basically kind of performing a role in public. You know, we had Matt last night who was performing being a mathematician. And so what he was talking about and what he was sharing wasn't necessarily the same as what he would do as a mathematician if he was working, as a professional mathematician, because the performance is about sharing it with the public. It's about engaging. It's about presenting an identity that you want or are happy to be associated with in the public sphere. And then research groups. So when you think of, focus groups, when you think of focus groups, you might think of a politician getting a bunch of people in off the street and going, so what do you think about the economy or taxes or whatever? In a research context, a focus group should be people who actually already know each other, who already interact around the problem that you're exploring, because what you're trying to investigate is not only what they think, it's also the relationships between those people. It's the workplace politics, it's the power dynamics. Does the RSE in a particular group get to express what they think about a problem openly? Are they guarded? Do they like wait for the PI to give their impression and then like try to agree with it, or do they try to challenge it, or do they try and go first and set the agenda? There's a lot going on in that. So that's the kind of how of what I did. Let's take these questions in order, remembering that I'm not going to have an answer to question 4. At least at Oxford, there is still a skills gap. I haven't shown that result on the side, but like a majority of people don't feel that they have the skills they need to work effectively with research software based on the people who responded to this survey. What I also asked is, well, where do you get these skills? And we find that self-teaching or like formal training, so that's probably going to be like a computer science degree or like a formal course within a university. These are the 2 most likely ways that people learn their software skills. And they're really like a lot of computer science degrees have a very small component that is software engineering. So you don't learn a lot about the practical software construction from this method, right? Or they get mentored from more experienced researchers. So we've still got this kind of cottage industry thing where a PI hands responsibility for a software project onto like this year's DPhil student or PhD student who learns how to maintain the code from last year's PhD student or from the postdoc in the group. Only 2 people said that they actually get mentoring from a research software engineer. So we have software engineering skills and we aren't exporting that to the rest of the research community. And but most people who, sorry, not most people, the largest answer to the question, what would be your most preferred way to work with someone on research software, would be that the group would include 1 or more research software engineers, so the kind of dark green area there. But also popular are some people in the group would focus on the research software, or that people in the group would have the software skills that they need. So there is demand still for software engineering skills across research groups. There is demand for people who work on research. We have not yet achieved the goal of everyone is comfortable that they have the research software skills that they need. So my other question, is this a profession? Are research software engineers like recognized as a kind of, as a distinct professional skilled working force? And the answer is kind of, but not quite. It's like still in the shadows of academia. It's still seen as a thing that is like an academic profession that is measured and recognized in the traditional way that academics are, i.e. through the kind of student, postdoc, junior fellow, professor. I've missed out a few roles, you get the idea. The traditional career path. And that RSEs themselves, at least the ones I spoke to in my interview, saw a kind of standoffishness from the academic world. A kind of, I've made it in my academic career by following this pathway. I kind of expect the same from you. You're trying to do something a bit weird, a bit different. I'm not sure that that's right. So the reason I've got Captain Picard there is that one of my interviewees actually said that there's this kind of expectation that you just tell an RSE what to do and say, make it so. And then they come back later with the exactly working software that fulfills the ideal that wasn't quite expressed well enough in that short interaction. But we don't have that like ongoing kind of trust relationship that allows us to like work effectively together on correcting the pathway and on collaborating on creating software in an evolutionary sort of iterative approach. So yeah, we need to do better at like proactively defining and articulating what it is that we do and why that is of benefit, so that we bring the people that we're working with on our journey. My other question was like, how do RSEs kind of trade off the various competing things they want to do? By and large, the answer seems to be by doing whatever is expected of an academic in most cases. And so that can actually limit the way in which we do our software engineering, because we're thinking, okay, the PI wants us to do it like this. I better do what the PI wants because that's how I'm going to get ahead in my career, or that's how I'm going to avoid having an awkward conversation. I'm not going, I'm going to kind of treat my research, my software engineering experience and what that is telling me to do as secondary. I might still get it done, but I'm going to kind of like sneak it in. I'm going to write tests and keep them in a corner and not really show them out to anybody because my PI didn't want me to write tests, or my PI actually wanted me to not write tests because they see that as a waste of time. I had one focus group where they talked about having a kind of informal code review culture that was like, I'll get you a pint if you find some bugs in my code, because they weren't allowed to do it within their kind of day-to-day work. So it became this like informal thing that was done on the side. So to remain legitimate within the academic space, the people I spoke to were behaving outwardly as academics and prioritizing that over being able to like apply their kind of distinct software engineering knowledge and their unique skills. And this particularly meant that things like requirements management or even software maintenance. Yeah, we talk a lot about reproducibility, replicability, and the ongoing sustainability of software. In practice, we find that those are skills that we want to be able to apply and have difficulty doing so. A pushback that I often get when it comes to talking about requirements is, hey, this is research. Like, we don't know what it is that we're doing. So how can we write the requirements down when we haven't worked out what we want yet? And the fact is that if you look at like a commercial software fund startup, like seed funded or Series A funded startup, they have the same problem. They have a group of people who know that they want to solve a problem, that they want to use software and they want to change the world. And they don't know how. And they've been given an amount of money by their investors. And they have to come back to their investors later with evidence that they are on track to solve this problem so that they can get more money from their investors so that they can continue to solve the problem. That sounds a lot like what a research group is doing. We have our team, we have our problem that we want to solve, our way in which we want to change the world. We have an amount of funding. And what we want to do is to come back later and say, here is the progress we've made towards understanding this problem and solving it, so that we can then get continuation of our funding so that we can carry on solving the problem. Commercial startups have iterative, evolutionary ways to identify and record the requirements as they understand them now and update them as their understanding grows, as they explore the problem space. So there are techniques in industry. We need to not look at kind of the big consultancy firms. You need to not look at the teams at kind of places like Microsoft and IBM who have been writing the same word processor for 30 years and see how they work. We need to look at how startups are understanding and exploring their problem spaces. And of course, as Simon said this morning, some of what I'm saying is obvious, but someone needed to write it down and put it on a slide so that we all state it. We need to emphasize the tangible benefits of this software in terms that resonate with what an academic is trying to achieve for their own benefits and their own impact, so that we get to do the things that we know we ought to do because it's going to help everybody else as well as helping us to do the software well. So what I came up with, how am I doing on time? I have 5 minutes, right? I'm going to tell you what I came up with, and it is this manifesto for change. I'm saying that like funders need to do these things, research organizations like universities need to do these things. Of course, this is in a holistic system, so we need to use the various influence points that we have. But funders need to work out which software actually needs to be sustainable. We can't just say like everything that we ever produce needs to have all of the engineering resources put on it, because there aren't those resources. A one-off R scripts to do some data cleaning on a single experiment maybe needs to be replicable so that people can download the data set, download the script, and verify that they get the same outputs. It doesn't necessarily need to be a reusable library that works on every single platform. Of course, sometimes software moves between being a one-off script, and then someone else sees the paper and goes, "Oh, I could do that," and then it becomes a reusable library accidentally. We need to track that. Yes, we need the career pathways and the job descriptions. We also need codes of ethical practice because what universities do at the moment is they have their research integrity policies. That doesn't necessarily cover everything that we do as software engineers. It doesn't necessarily cover intellectual property related to software reuse. It doesn't cover the harms or benefits from the software being published beyond the research context. We not only need to address the skills gaps that we've identified, we also need to outreach, even if all we're doing is telling researchers what they don't know that they don't know, so that they can come to us and ask for our help in solving it. We're still seeing that researchers aren't learning about software engineering from RSEs. And I put open source by default. We've had a lot of talks at this conference about open source, which is great to see. But building open source software and then governance systems around it helps to formalize a lot of the outreach, a lot of the community building, and a lot of the shared effort that we're trying to achieve. We also need researchers to do their part, which is to credit the contributions made to the research by the software and by the software engineers. And we see things like the Amsterdam Declaration, the Adore Declaration. This is something that's starting to change. Simon's talk this morning about the hidden rep as well. And we need a kind of seat at the planning table so that we're making sure we understand what we need to do software-wise, rather than just having this make it so culture of, I've defined a problem, you go solve it, I'll see you in 18 months. RSE isn't a profession, it's a social movement. It's an attempt to revolutionize the way that research is done by changing the way that research engages with software. I'm hoping that the research I've done acts as a kind of theoretical basis so that the rest of us, the agitators, the propagandists, and the activists can actually go out and make the changes that we need to see in the world. And I am actually done and on time, so thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Graham. We have 2 questions online. Probably can show them here. Figure out how to work the system. Great. So the first question is the inclusive nature of the RSE label, as in if you make software for research or an RSE, a barrier to formalizing profession.
Yeah, that is a great question, and that's really a sort of question of framing. Do we need to define RSE as a profession, or is it, as I framed it, a social movement is aiming to revolutionize research? If it's the latter, then what we're doing is changing the way the research gets done and the research software gets done within that research ecosystem, and we're kind of bringing everyone, not only the people who identify as RSEs, but everyone within the research ecosystem along with us. So no, I understand that kind of saying profession has this kind of connotation of like, maybe a guild or a certifying body. I'm not necessarily saying that, but what I am exploring is, how are RSEs perceived as workers, as potentially professional workers within this ecosystem.
We have time for the other question as well. At what point should the software skills be taught?
That's a great question. I mean, you can, of course, teach computational knowledge at primary school. People who are approximately my age will remember driving little robotic turtles around on the floor and writing programs in the Logo programming language to make them do things. That doesn't necessarily translate to then being a professional software engineer later in your career, although here I am. So, it does for some people. But that kind of algorithmic thinking, breaking a problem down, decomposition is definitely a skill we need. I think, at what point should software engineering skills be taught? Should be at the point where, like, we realize that, the person is going to be working with software. So some of it, not necessarily a degree in software engineering, but some knowledge does need to be available to all computational researchers, or all researchers who then accidentally discover that they are computational researchers somewhere along their journey. But there's like a sliding scale.
Thanks so much, Graham.